I'm an archaeologist and I'm passionate about learning about the past. In early Lucine archaeology, caves were the focus, but more recently a lot of archaeologists have focused on trying to find the open-air sites and have started ignoring the caves again. I believe that there's still a lot more information in the caves.
I've been in the Turks and Caicos since 2006, and right from the very start I've been interested in the culture and the history, and set out primarily as a hobby, just exploring on my own the outer islands and old plantation ruins and abandoned caves and the like. In the last few years, with the appointment of the new museum director, Michael, he reached out to me after seeing an article that I wrote on a recent expedition and asked if we could join forces and use our kind of resources and background information in order to basically put some expeditions together. So I think since Michael arrived, he's been well aware of a historical document written in the very early 1900s by a guy who came here in, I say 1905 or 1906 or around that kind of time, by, I think his name was Dubuy. And he wrote a manuscript about some caves that he explored on East Caicos, as well as other parts of the TCI. And primarily the focus was he found some old cave drawings, cave art or pictographs. So this kind of mystery is 100 years old.
In 1912, we had an anthropologist, Theodore Dubuy, who came here to the island and was told about the cave and that there were quote-unquote Indian artifacts there. He went in and he noted that there were petroglyphs on the cave and some rock carvings, and he recorded 6 petroglyphs and a rock carving.
So we're heaving down rock at the far end of Providenciales. We're going to take the Caribbean cruising ferry, which is about a 25-minute journey to North Caicos. Then we're going to pick up our rental car and drive the length of North Caicos, Middle Caicos, take about an hour, and then we're going to get picked up by our 2 flats boats who are going to shuttle us across and all our kit to East Caicos. Because of the size of the team and the equipment needed for the kind of 3 days we were going to be camping on East Caicos, 2 modes of transport were needed. Boats were needed on East Caicos to shuttle us across to the inlet and the estuaries to get to the points where we could start hiking from. But because of the number of people and the equipment, we couldn't take everything on the boat. So it was decided that we'd set off on 2 modes of transport. A couple of guys would take the boats down, unladen, through the tight estuaries and shallow waters of the Caicos banks and meet us at the south point of Middle Caicos. And the rest of us would drive all the kit down in a big SUV, the hour-and-a-half drive through North and Middle Caicos to a place called Wild Cow Run, which is the endmost point of Middle Caicos and the most desolate part you could possibly be in until you step into another realm of East Caicos. We went down there with a car full of goods and coolers and equipment and food and water, and then parked up and spent maybe an hour, 2 hours ferrying it from the parking trailhead to the beach and awaited to pick up from the boats. And when the boats arrived, we'd done a couple of trips, and the guys shuttled across to our kind of new trailhead, our beachhead, our base camp on East Caicos.
I am Shaun Sullivan, and I am with the Anthropological Research Council, a nonprofit in the United States that supports anthropological research. I'm here because I have experience working archaeological sites in this area, as well as searching out new sites.
After leaving Wild Cow Run in the skiffs and we landed on East Caicos, obviously it was still early. It was still early morning. We'd made good time, but it was decided that we'd get to the cave straight away. So we'd kind of just cached all our equipment in one spot on the beach, made sure it was kind of safe and secure, and then set off across the narrow inlet to what is the start of an old abandoned causeway, and it's commonly called the Donkey Railway. and we followed the causeway up, which is a man-made structure of just kind of dry stone wall and rubble. And we followed that up through the bush, hacking where we had to go, coming off the causeway and joining it again and walking through some thick bush and some open areas until we came to the first cave, which was named Stubbs 1. So this is the cave that Dubuis back in the 1900s detailed with some hand-drawn sketches that the pictographs were in. So this is the cave that we were primarily interested in. So we entered the cave. It was very hot and muggy outside, but the cave inside was quite cool. We set about with flashlights and some knowledge that Michael had of what the pictographs looked like, and he had a hand-drawn map so he could reference the ones he'd found. And we started looking, and at first there was absolutely nothing to be seen. So we decided to further venture into the cave. We started walking around. And again, for the first kind of few minutes, there was just nothing to be seen, just algae on the walls and cracks in the limestone. And then we saw one kind of faint outline, which could have been some sort of shape. And Michael immediately recognised it as one of Dubuis' sketches. So this proved straight away the fact that Dubuis had been here nearly 100 plus years ago, and that in fact he had found petrographs. And the strange thing was, as soon as we started looking kind of further and our eyes accustomed and we knew exactly what we were looking for, the cracks in the limestone just kind of materialised into man-made ancient kind of cave art and drawings. And the more we adapted to looking beyond the algae and the build-up and the moss and the kind of natural kind of cracks, the drawings just started to kind of pop out. Not only did we then see as many as Dubuis had discovered, but we started to discover even more. And it turns out that we've now discovered some petrographs that had never even been documented before. So after a couple of hours in the cave and exploring deep passages, in fact, some passages and chambers were too deep and too far to even explore without proper safety equipment. And we found numerous pictographs. It was decided that we'd return to base camp, set up camp properly, and then return the next day with Michael's full documentation, some old maps that he had, the full set of sketches that he had. And the plan was for the next day then was to go in with the documentation and literally tick off on the cave map of the ones we'd found that we could confirm Dubuis had found, and then more importantly add on to the map the new pictographs that we'd discovered that were basically unknown to anyone before this time. The morning of day 2, we have a breakfast meeting around the campfire, and we decide that although Michael wants to primarily get back to the cave to basically tick off what he's found and add to his documents the new cave art that he's found, we wanted to basically show him a second cave that was further up into the islands. And this is primarily, I think, called Stubbs number 2, or the flooded cave. Again, a very large cave system, but half filled with water. So we decided that if we were going to do that and spend all day doing that, we also wanted to take him along on a bit of a detour to what is known as Flamingo Hill, which is the highest point in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And very, very few people have been there. In fact, more people have climbed Mount Everest than have climbed Flamingo Hill, not because of its size, but quite simply due to its remoteness and its difficulty in getting to. So the plan was to spend the full day doing Flamingo Hill and the flooded cave, and that would leave us day 3 for Michael to go back to Stubbs 1 cave and document the drawings as he needed to. So we set off early in the morning, straight after breakfast, and we walked for a good couple of miles across flat tundra, limestone. At some points the trains changed to like thick bush, and we had to get our machetes out and cut our way through. It's not too part, but
Yeah, tops put on after.
okay, but no side seam.
Yeah.
No.
Our adventure once again, late 19th century.
Yeah.
up? What are we doing?
We're going to be climbing Flamingo Hill.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how hard is the climb? If 10's Everest.
1.
Top of Flamingo Hill, the tallest point in the Turks and Caicos Islands, about 150 feet high. I think it was about a 2.5-mile hike from camp to the hill.
I got one, thanks.
And then, which was about 3 hours, I would estimate. And then the hike up the hill was pretty intense. It's just beautiful. I would recommend that anybody, not just people who live here, but people who visit it, experience this. The hike was hard, but it was worth it.
After an hour or so on the summit of Flamingo Hill, enjoying the 360-degree vistas where you can pretty much see every island from South Caicos, pretty much the North Caicos and everything in between, we headed back down, and the idea was to meet up again with the boats at the estuary who had now dropped off our flippers and our masks and our snorkeling equipment, and we were going to head up to the snorkeling cave, or the flooded cave. So there were a couple of friends of ours fishing in the area who'd heard that we were exploring and camping, so we invited them along to come and join us for the flooded cave expedition, which they were more than happy to do. So again, we set up the causeway, hacking through the bush where we could for a couple of hours. The causeway is so well built, but unfortunately it's so overgrown. Even if someone goes ahead in the bush for 10 feet, you can lose sight of them. So it was important that we maintain contact along the way. So we cut our trail through the bush and eventually found the mouth of the cave. And heading back down into it again, at first nothing extraordinary, just the mouth of a cave, and we went down the slope into it, and in the bottom was a pool of water, and at first it was very underwhelming, and then we've got the flashlights out and started looking around, and it was apparent that the cave system went way back. So apparently the only way to get to the back of the cave is to snorkel. So we put our fins and our mask on and have our dive underwater lights out. And then on entering the water, which is very cold but very refreshing after the long hike, it's actually crystal clear and dead still. So we entered the water, and it was a very eerie experience, floating through the water with the light beams playing on the bottom, and just dead silence, and the big cathedral ceiling above us being lit by flashlights and stuff. It was a very surreal experience. And when your flashlight picks up maybe an old shovel or an old piece of equipment that was used back in the late 1800s, when these guys were working in there in horrendous conditions. And what's kind of interesting is the water's actually maybe in some places 20-30 feet deep. Back in the late 18th, 19th century, these caves were particularly important to loyalists and plantation settlers because they were full of backdroppings, which is known as guano. And that produces a very good fertilizer, and in some cases I believe it's actually also used for explosives. So it was an important commodity, and great expense and labour went into mining this guano, which is like clay kind of sand powder, which settles on the base of the cave from the bats above. Now some of this guano can be up to 20-30 feet thick in some places. So it takes years and years to mine it out, shoveling it out by hand and bucket, putting it into little railway carts. The carts are then pulled by the donkeys along the causeway down to the boats. So it takes many years to mine. It's very lucrative while it lasts, but it is a finite, obviously, resource, and eventually it ran out, and the whole system on East Caicos collapsed because of the guano finished. We swim through the length of the cave, and the lights are dancing off the walls, and we're swimming away, and then we come across an obstacle in the water which turns out to be a huge tree, like a log, and it's not just one, but there's two or three. Now these logs have been obviously felled and stripped of their bark and maybe used for scaffolding or rollers or some sort of support, but they're in the cave and they're floating in the water, perfectly preserved. Some of the biggest trees I've ever seen in the TCI. Some of the trunks were 24 inches in diameter. In the TCI today, you very rarely get those kind of trees. So obviously at some point there was more abundant vegetation than there is now. And that's evidence of that. As we went in further, we come underneath a big skylight in the ceiling, some maybe 60 feet above us. Beautiful shaft of light coming down onto a rock. And we sat there for maybe an hour and just kind of chilled in the clear water and just relaxed and talked. We did see some remains of a donkey, unfortunately, that had at some point in the past fallen through the skylight to its death in the water, and its bones were there. And then we just had a slow swim out again, exploring with our flashlights, above and below the water.
Well, we're looking at ourselves a nice little bit of East Caicos lobster. We got ourselves a good mixed bag, snappers, some jacks, little odds and ends, but it all come together with a pretty good tasting meal, I think.
So morning of day 3, again, a bit of a team kind of briefing around the campfire over breakfast. So it's Michael's plan now this morning to use the 5 or 6 hours we have left before the return journey home to go back to the cave at Stubbs 1 and reconfirm the pictographs that he's found and add into his map and his documents the new ones that he found previously. So half the team went over to Stubbs 1 on the boats in the morning. While the guys were in the cave for those few hours, I decided to walk up the beach to an old loyalist plantation named Jacksonville, which used to support a lot of the guano operations. It's almost like a small town. There's a number of houses or structures left, maybe 4 or 5 ruins. This is cut limestone with a lime plaster made of boiled up shells, maybe conch shells. But the walls here, fantastically thick, fantastically good condition. Single story, would have had a wood roof on here. Plastered inside as well. And this is interesting. You can just make out the outline of a boat with the sail there. Just a domestic kind of graffiti or reminds someone from home. The site's totally overgrown and strewn with remnants of the occupation, bottles, glass, crockery, etc., etc. Armed with maps and journals, some of the team set out to find and document the petroglyphs found 2 days ago and hopefully discover more. Much like day 1, the team had a hard time finding the same ones previously located, but after some experimenting with various lighting techniques, the faint carvings emerged from the walls once again. All of the known debris and lace documentations were accounted for, plus several undiscovered carvings were also identified. In fact, over 20 carvings were documented, including a row of 5 faces, a pipe, and individuals with rays, and numerous animals with human features. Petroglyphs of everyday objects like a canoe paddle or a pipe can seem easier to interpret. Others are more difficult to understand. Were they created over a short time by a single individual maybe, or over a long time by multiple individuals? Questions like these are why we explore as well as document and study our findings. The success of the expedition to East Caicos has reiterated the need for further exploration throughout the entire TCI. As T.S. Eliot once said, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time.